And with that, welcome to the KCP community meeting, the first one after KubeCon EU. And with that, everyone's still being a bit tired today, probably. So getting started with the usual things. So this call is governed by the CNCF Code of Conduct, which boils down to let's be excellent to each other. So we are going to do exactly that. And yeah, with that, I don't think we have new faces here. Is there anyone who would like to, I don't know, reintroduce themselves or say hi?
Hi.
I think we all know you, MJ, but thank you nonetheless. Okay. Then with that, if you are attending, feel free to please add yourself to the agenda for today. But with that in mind, let me share my screen and we can take a quick look at the agenda. Okay, so first topic on the agenda for today is virtual resources, next steps. I guess I'll hand it over to you, MJ, to talk a bit more about that.
Okay, maybe let me share a screen, or do you want to open a doc?
No, it's all right. You can share your screen if you want.
And this window, this one should be it. So we got merged quite a big PR on the API exports minor version second iteration, so Alpha 2. The goal for that, just to recap, is that we're working towards refactoring API export resource schema to support virtual resources. Virtual resources being the resources projected into your workspace, which potentially are not something you want to modify, or it's more for a reference to be used for the user. So example we've been using across the state is when you're creating something like virtual machines, you want to provide instance types, people can refer to them. So refactoring resource schemas, this one is now this one, basically now allows us to start introducing different layer of storage. But before we do that, I was thinking that, like, how do we split this in the more logical, smaller chunks to deliver? And one of the things we've been talking is adding a replication API, where it would follow something similar pattern as API exports, where you create basically a replications object into your workspace, which would be part of the core APIs, and you specify which resources you want to replicate, and you get the hash, so like normal flow as you would do with API exports. And this trigger these resources to be replicated into the cache. In the long run, there will be quota applied to it, some maybe limitations. So somebody would not be able to like DDoS the cache server. So that would be one of the smaller chunks to be delivered, like as individual ticket somebody could pick up to implement the replications API. A second one would be where we have now API endpoint slices for API exports. So API export endpoint slices. Idea would be that if somebody starts using this in their API exports, we would generate a separate object, virtual resources endpoint slice, which would act in the same way as API exports endpoint slice, and points to some kind of virtual workspace to be developed, basically, where these resources are served. So you still need identity in a ways. And from users' perspective, they kind of, this is the same claims. But the idea is that now this URL plus API export URL would be aggregated under the hood. So I think what I'm proposing now is, if we can confirm this asynchronously, that this is something API we want to target, if it's fine, I think this would be the next small chunk to pick up and work on this. And I think this one could be still up for questioning if we want it or not, what would be the direction. But I kind of have a feeling this is not blocked by like replication API. We can start working with API, and this would kind of, we can agree as we go. Because the final goal is to have this basically ability to project virtual resources into the workspaces or something else, basically. So ideas, like suggestions, how does it sound?
The only thing that I have is basically I would like to nitpick this replication API a little bit. I'm trying to put it into like a bigger picture. Like the API group, I was wondering if it should have like its own replication API, or if this is maybe something, that could be an API as KCPIO, or should there maybe be a cache.kcpio, like ways to interact with the cache server? And one of these things is a replication to the cache server.
Mm-hmm. It makes sense, very much makes sense. Like, so if you could leave the comment in a document, we can basically decide asynchronously. And if you have and if anybody else has any other comments, let know. Else, I would like to start us progressing on this further, because it's slowly building towards this. And I think this is a most tenuous one. But yeah, basically same partitioning stuff as we do with endpoint slices. Most of that code would be copy-paste.
Just trying, what is the endpoint slice? What's it supposed to do exactly? Like, I mean, it gives me URLs, but do I need that? Isn't that something that the API exports or like the binding would figure out? Do you know what I mean?
So on the binding side, you don't have URL. So like on binding side, it stays the same, and everything is the same. Because so this.
Let me rephrase. Who's calling this URL?
In my head, this URL should be called by potentially workspaces, virtual workspace, basically virtual workspace serving virtual code serving virtual workspaces. Like, so the place user gets the workspace itself. The content should be taken from here from projection. So remember we talked about aggregation server for the workspace view.
Yeah.
So that would be one of the inputs to the aggregation server.
So you would. I'm trying to figure out how that virtual workspace would like discover the right endpoint slice to use. I think that's what. But okay, this might go into much detail, but I'm a little unclear on the endpoint slice thing. I feel like the virtual workspace should be able to figure this out on their own.
So, but I think it's not here. But the idea would be like, if you have a schema, so group would be, I don't know, maybe this instances accepted and hash, and group. Meaning you need to claim it, like you still need to claim it as an object into the API export. Hence, you have a reference what you claimed. Hence, we can basically aggregate it from there. Like, I think this is a still missing piece too, and needs to be refined. Because maybe we don't add a new object here, and we just append these URLs to the existing API export endpoint slices as a secondary slices too, like Like let's say I have gaps in my head too, how this could look like final picture. I think this is needed for sure.
Yeah.
But once we put it to the cache server, we need to expose it somehow to the aggregation layer to be developed. And this could look like a way where how you can expose it, because basically that would be per shard. And once you claim it in the API binding, that thingy would get replicated. I think I tried to put it somewhere next to the draw stuff too. Yeah, basically we create a virtual workspace slice, and the API virtual workspace aggregation would take these objects and aggregate. So that part is a bit unknown. So I think if we now can agree in short term, can agree on the replication part and asynchronously think and comment out how we want to see that in being promoted to the aggregation layer, basically.
Yeah, sounds good to me. The best case that I'm seeing is that we simply don't need this resource here, the endpoint slice. So, we're not losing anything by keeping the discussion going.
Like we still need somehow like somewhere a virtual workspace per shard should exist, which serves these cached resources based on identity, basically.
But
like identity here.
We should wrap up this topic at some point, but do we really? Because this is information coming from the cache, right? And the cache will always have the complete list of objects. So I'm really wondering if there's going to be something on the shard side serving, like there's no incomplete view from a shard to host. Not like with an API export, right? Where you get basically a partial list of objects to reconcile depending on where the object in the shard setup is.
I'm not sure which part you're questioning, like identity part or
the endpoint slices for virtual resources, because we have the complete list. We have to get it from the cache server, and
but
the endpoint
you don't want
slices...
to call it like. I think the idea is that you don't want to call cache server directly. There should be something in a KCP core which abstracts that. Like that component calls cache and gets these resources potentially locally. Because, let's take it offline. I think there might be more cases. So ask is short term, let's look in replication. Long term, that's long term might be next community meeting. We need to think how do we progress further. So that was one. Maybe migration path. So this is, maybe let's move it to the next one. I was talking about as we released a new API version, we continue chat, how do we do migration now for the V1 Alpha 1 to V1 Alpha 2 for the existing objects in the system. So I think suggestion was just a server side patch, basically, some kind of component running there.
I mean, that seems easy enough, right? Like from what Stefan said on the Slack channel, you need to send an empty server-side patch, and that's like about it. So
should we just create a ticket and somebody tries it and see how it goes? Like we still need to remember, like not to migrate stuff which will migrated. But ideally, it should be just run, and if once completed, just put a placeholder somewhere and then.
I didn't get a chance to think about this, but do we already serve both APIs now? V1 Alpha 1 and V1 Alpha 2?
Yeah, we do.
And the conversion between them already exists as well?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, then someone can already try this out. Yeah.
Okay, so
Given that Stefan mentioned this controller from upstream, the storage migrator, if that's doing the same thing, just like patching everything with a server-side apply, it might be a nice idea to like reuse it.
Okay, so that's, I think I collected 2 issues to 1. Okay, so I think I have already issue for that, so you can basically refer to that and start looking into this.
Okay.
Cool, so that covers both of my issues.
Okay, that was pretty quick. Next one on the agenda would be yours, Marco, talking about verb support for permission claims.
So I brought up a thread in the Slack channel earlier today. The issue that we have with it is it turned out to be a breaking change, because how are we going to treat the existing API exports and API bindings that don't have any verbs specified? Initially, we thought that we can just assume all verbs, but that would mean that we have to do something like, if the verbs list is null, that it's not provided at all, we default that to all verbs. However, it is doable, not like that it isn't doable, but that's not in line with the Kubernetes behavior. So if you, for example, take the Airbag stuff, you take the role and cluster role and try to create a list role that has null verbs, is going to reject you that resource. So you need to have at least one verb defined in the list of verbs. So we were talking, I talked to some folks, and we figured out that it would be nice to try to keep the Kubernetes behavior so that we make it more simple. This is kind of a security stuff. So as we want to make it explicit in a way, and we thought that we keep the Kubernetes behavior so that you have to specify something. But the issue with that is then, how do we handle the existing resources, existing API bindings and exports? And what we came up is that we will need a new API version, which we have already, and that we could only add verbs to that new version so that we don't break existing users. That for existing users, we still assume everything, but by the new API version, we can actually enforce that you have to provide something when using the permission claims.
And yeah, my 2 cents on that are I would much prefer if we align things with Kube. And given that we're still in alpha API versions, I would prefer to do it sooner than later. Makes it a bit more explicit, which I guess with permission claims, we should aim for.
So I'm just thinking out loud, like, I agree with this. So round tripping basically would mean, if I'm tripping, let's say we don't add it to the V1, we add directly to the V2, like to both. We create an API binding and like this exists already. We can add to it. This one we need to create. This means we treat V1. V1 would be basically this wildcard, but silent. Where if we go to V2, like if we convert V1 to V2, we basically add wildcard or basically all verbs, something like that. The problem is that V2 to V1 breaks if you have less of permissions.
Isn't that the case where you would put this information in an annotation?
Yes, that's exactly what I wanted to ask.
So you can put an annotation, but the challenge is, let's say, if you add let's say, only update object v2, and now this object gets converted to v1, like a v1 controller reads it. It doesn't understand how to treat update. It says like, oh, wildcard, basically, whole permissions. It's maybe that's not a
How do you
big an
mean?
issue because we control all the controllers.
And this is mainly targeting the API export virtual workspace. It's pretty isolated in those terms.
So let's think about the blast radius. So from like KCP code, we will upgrade to the V2, right? Like we're not gonna work on the V1 in our controllers.
Yeah.
So the only people affected by this would be people that have written controllers against V1. And the permission claims in specific are honestly only really relevant for the virtual workspace. I at least hope that no controller is reading that and doing things with it, because it shouldn't. And if like, so that like leaves controllers operators that are creating API exports, and yeah, they're going to create it in V1 and they're going to get the same behavior because internally it's round trip to V2 with a star verb.
Yeah.
Wildcard verb. So I think we're good here.
I think too. So the plan is we add verbs to existing API exports, basically. We cut off a new version for API bindings, hence a new converters, a new API. Potentially maybe do this in a separate PRs, like just to do a skeleton for Alpha 2 without verbs, because that will be a huge PR on its own.
Yeah, that sounds like a good plan.
And after that, all the conversion stuff, all the tests, we already have a skeleton for testing. And I think that's basically it. Like this part, this is a separate conversation where we need to drop this like all true, but that's a follow-up ticket.
Yeah, ideally we should adjust the API as well already before V1 Alpha 2 then gets finalized by the next KCP release. But yeah, I would say it doesn't have to be in the same PR.
Or maybe just a separate commit, so it's easier to like split out stuff in there. Like I think it will be big PR, so just a
Yeah, so I think what we first need, so the idea that we had was that instead of the all true field that you have, you basically have a selector with match labels, and that match labels is like an empty object, and that matches everything, right?
yeah.
So that would be the like explicit way to spell it out. But for that, first we need label matching supports in permission claims, and then we can basically remove the all true thing.
So just to spell it out, verbs plus new API version. So that's work in progress. Label selector supports in V1 Alpha 2. And or both. I think we can add it to both, basically.
I think this looks about right. The next one then would be remove all as a field on the new API. And this is also something we can round trip easily. That's why we have this.
But this label selector, I think, like what's the current problem is that our label selector is not Kubernetes. We have the stanza, which doesn't work.
I think it just doesn't have implementation.
Yeah.
But is the syntax wise, is it compatible with Kube?
We should check. If not, this would be also the time to make it feel like a cube label selector.
Because like if we're implementing 2, we can do that for alpha 1, 2, because code will be the same. But this means it will save us the round tripping machinery and everything if it's involved already.
Yeah, the selector that we have right now is a resource selector. You can select by name and namespace.
Yes.
And that doesn't support the labels. So
Okay, so that means it's breaking.
I mean, I'm
But even
thinking
that-
about verbs. Sorry, go ahead.
But even those name and namespace doesn't work, right?
Yeah, not implemented.
But
Okay, so-
given that all of this is not implemented, it gives us the chance to like revisit if the API is good as it stands, right?
Yep. Okay, so are we good with verbs part?
Yeah,
So this one, label selector,
it would come as a follow-up.
yeah, let's, I think we already can start working, to be honest, on this one. Doesn't block the verbs. Okay, we need the new API stuff, so it's kind of blocked.
Yeah.
Okay,
One question, when do we expect the next release? So 0.28 or however it goes. Yeah, 0.28.
A pretty good question. Given that we have the 1.32 rebase pending, we have a new cube version coming up then. So that means, I wouldn't want to wait too long for it. But then again, we should make sure that we have some features we add in. So the new API version would probably be something that I would want to ship in that release.
question is how much complete, because there will be a lot of things going into that. So let's see, Robert is coming back next week, so can I pick up the rebase of the rebase PR? And we'll see where it gets us with the previous topic and this one.
So I think we don't have a release date, but within the next few months, but I wouldn't want to specify it more right now. We have a release branch, we can patch it if there's anything urgent coming up to cut new patch releases. And the cube version it's based on will be supported for quite a while. So all right. Yeah.
All good.
Yep. With that, we are actually, do we have any other topics? This is like the open floor kind of part. Okay, just maybe as a minor update to the community, I have, or like Christoph and I actually have started migrating Prow jobs to the OCI community cluster or community infrastructure that we now finally have up and running. I think I'm still struggling with some things. I think I missized the nodes, like they don't have enough storage, so jobs get evicted. So, all of these little kind of ops topics that I'm getting a bit rusty at, apparently. We'll have to do that. But so far, it looked like the first job, per se was passing. So we'll see how we migrate jobs over there within the next few weeks. If we make like a big cutover, I think we can't move them one by one unless you put them all in the info repo, which would be a bit annoying because currently they are in the project repositories. I'm not sure if you can do a cut by project, maybe. I don't know, move like the API sync agent over and see how that goes. I'm not sure about that. But yeah, that's work in progress. Do we have anything else? Does anyone else have any updates they want to talk about, want to share? Any questions?
Question maybe? Christoph, how's your code generator saga going on?
It's coming along. Again, I started out by just duplicating the Kubernetes code generator, and I'm now changing line by line the templates to match what we generated before. For the first few files, it already looks good. I'm now fighting a little bit with the system, how the import statements are generated, because that's a bit complicated. But yeah, I'm still optimistic that this is going to work out. But I just started working on the fake clients, and there the diffs are immense, so that could be fun.
Nice. I'm rooting for you. Like, I really wanted this to land, to be honest.
Yeah, my plan is that in the end we have 3 code generators. To distinguish them from Kubernetes, I would have called them like cluster client gen and cluster lister gen and cluster informer gen, because I think at some point we will have them all in the same tools directory at KCP, and I don't want them to conflict with the Kubernetes generators. Yeah. Progress is being made.
Might be a stupid question, but can't we just call them KCP informer generator and so on?
I wasn't sure if that's the intention. The old code generator just called itself code generator. There is some command line flag on the old one that is called single cluster package path. So maybe the term single cluster and multi-cluster is more desired. I can call it KCP client gen, sure. We can bike shed that for a long time. That is really the smallest change to make.
Yeah, that's true. Okay, yeah. Sounds like a great status update. Okay.
I see someone talking, by the way. Is that normal?
Come again?
To me, Nilo T. Wallace is talking, but I don't hear them.
It's probably just a bug. I've shut off my microphone physically, so it's probably just taking up some interference.
Never mind. Sorry. Good. Marvin, back to you.
All right. With that, last chance to bring up any topics. Okay, then enjoy your Thursday evening, folks. Your, I guess, for plenty of us, recovery time from KubeCon. Get better soon. And I will see you all very soon. Have a great one.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.